All right, CNT120, Chapter 1. We're going to go through the chapter and break it into pieces. This first piece, we're going to just do the introduction to a network, if you will. Chapter 1, we have a number of different topics we're going to introduce. We're going to come back in later chapters and dig into some of these deeper, but we're kind of opening the book and getting going. So this first section, let's talk about network in general. If we look at a definition for a network, and this is similar to the one that's in the book, a network is a group of computers and other devices, printers, smartphones, tablet PCs, Xbox, Nintendo Switches, Wii, PlayStation, IP phone, etc., that are all connected together by some type of transmission media, copper wire, fiber optic cable, RF for wireless. That is a network. All those devices connect together, usually for a purpose. Usually to do things like share the internet connection, usually to do things like share files or move data around between them. That's usually the function of a network. Well, before we dig into modern networks, we do need to kind of understand real quickly where we came from. So let's go back real quickly, kind of back in time. How about a company network? Because company networks evolved before home networks did, by far. So let's kind of look at a super quick, how did we get where we are in companies today? Well, if we go back into, the 60s time frame, if you will, 1960s, many businesses had a mainframe computer, and a mainframe computer was basically one giant computer that everybody connected to. So imagine the the CPU with your computer, everybody in your house connected to that. That's what the mainframe was. And literally sitting on people's desks were a terminal, a monitor with a keyboard. That's it, a monitor and keyboard, if you will. No mice or anything like that. And everybody basically shared this computer. So any data was on there, and I could open, I could put stuff in a folder, if you will, and then you could open the folder and look at the file, or we could work on it together, if you will. That was the idea. That was kind of like the first computers that most people worked with. Along came the personal computer. Now we're talking like the 70s, if you will, 70s and 80s, if you will. Along comes the personal computer. Now everybody has their own personal computer sitting on their desk. So now when we want to share information, when I want to be able to pass a file to you to say, hey, here's this report or here's this spreadsheet or whatever, you literally needed to put it onto some sort of medium, a floppy disk, and carry it to another computer so they could open it up, look at it, get the data, maybe add data to it. So at this time frame, that was affectionately called sneakernet, because you would literally put the file onto a disk, walked it to another computer, plugged into that computer, pulled it up, and pulled up that data. That's how data was moved around. So most businesses at this point were like, hey, we need a way that we're not having to move these things around manually. We need some kind of way that we can move this data around. We need a network. Well, in the 70s time frame, everything was very proprietary. So if you had Apple computers, you built an Apple network using Apple cabling, Apple protocols to connect your Apple computers together. And that is how you moved your data around. Meanwhile, if your company had IBM PCs, well, you used IBM cabling with IBM protocols, with IBM devices to move data between your IBM computers. Meanwhile, if your company had Xerox computers, you use Xerox cabling connected to Xerox network devices using Xerox protocols to move data between your computers. Well, out of all of these, the one that has kind of stood the time is this last one, because Xerox is the one that developed Ethernet. Everything has kind of migrated to Ethernet over time because of it's not, I hate to use the word, it's not the best, but it's kind of like the best combination of. It worked the best for the price, if you will. So Ethernet kind of evolved that now most businesses have this. They have an Ethernet network to connect together all of these kinds of things to share information, move information around, as well as to get to the internet for their business. And that is now kind of like migrated through to, back here was in the 80s, if you will. Here we have 90s, 2000s to where we are now. Moving on this is what most businesses have now to connect their devices together in Ethernet network, to share files, data, etc., as well as get to the internet. Well, let's zoom back in time now for homes. Most of us at home, back in the maybe 80s to 90s, maybe 10 to 20 years behind businesses, probably maybe for a lot of us in the 90s, we would have a computer at home connected to a dial-up modem, connecting to a service like, PA Online, CompuServe, AOL, there was like NetZero, a bunch of these dial-up services that were in most of our area that we would use to connect to our internet provider. In this case, it was the phone company that was providing my internet connection, if you will. And a lot of us had a phone splitter in the house that we could share our computer and our phone. And you literally needed to, if you were on the computer, not use the phone. If you were on the phone, not use the computer, kind of thing. You would share that line. A lot of us did that. Our house did that too. That was cheaper than having two phone lines. Some people then moved on to literally having a separate phone line and a separate computer line. We held out for the longest time and did not do that just because it was extra cost per month. But some people started doing that. We're like, we're using the computer enough. We need a separate connection for the computer and a separate connection for the phone. Well, then along comes DSL and cable modem in many areas. Now we're into the 90s, and for some people, early 2000s. Kind of in the Windows 98, maybe Windows 2000 time frame, or maybe even Windows XP. A lot of us moved over to DSL or cable modem for more bandwidth. And it really depended on the area you lived in as which one was available. Some areas it was strictly DSL, some areas it was strictly cable modem. But many people moved on to that to get more bandwidth for their computer. And now you had basically an ISP connection with your DSL or cable modem, and you might have still had a regular phone line. Most of us still did. So now you had almost like two separate connections going on. When the second computer showed up in the house is when a lot of people were like, okay, well, now what do we do? When we had this second computer in the house, what do we do? Because these DSL and cable modems at that time had literally an inside port and an outside port. That was it. There was no other connection. It was basically for that one device. So when this happened, a lot of people are like, okay, well, now what do we do? And usually it was the case of like a friend or a neighbor was just like, oh, okay, here's what you do. Go out and buy this router thing, this Linksys Netgear Belkin router thing. And I'm throwing those names out because a lot of people probably had that type of model in their house. Go out and buy this Linksys Netgear Belkin router thing, and now you can hook up more than one computer in your house out to the internet service provider. Well, this router thing really is, I think I have it on this slide here. Actually, I have right here, is really a network in a box, for the lack of a better term. If you were to break that open, don't do that, but if you were to break that open, you actually find in there circuitry that is a router, along with a firewall, a circuitry that's a switch, that's why there's multiple ports on the back of it, that you can plug multiple devices in. A lot of us have, I have my PlayStation plugged in. A lot of us have a desktop computer plugged in. Some of you might even have a file or media server plugged in directly to your device. Those are switch ports. And then there's also an access point circuitry in there. There might not actually be physical antennas sticking off the back, but there's an access point because I can connect my wireless devices to them, whether it be laptop, phone, tablet, etc. So my router here that we bought was really a network in a box. And that is how you were able to do and are able to do now this. Multiple devices connected to it, just like a company, out to your whatever your modem is. Some people are using cable, some people are using DSL. I'm using Fios in my place. This is still serving the same kind of purpose. It's converting the signaling over to the provider network. But I'm able to have all of these devices in my house connected to my internet connection because this device here, this router thing, and I'm using little air quotes here, this router thing is really a network in a box for me. So why have a network? Well, go back here to our business. Why do businesses have them? So we can move data among our devices, as well as get connection to maybe a shared internet connection for the business. And why do we have a network in our house? Same purpose. Same purpose, to connect multiple devices, to move data around, but more than likely to share this internet connection that I have for my house. One connection for my house, all the devices in my house connect through it. That's why we have a network. So keep that in mind. Businesses they were 10 to 20 years ahead of a lot of us, but it's literally the same purpose. A business has a network as we have a network at home. It's really no different. The only difference is, in a business, all of these devices are not in one box. They are broken out into separate pieces. I have a dedicated firewall. I have a dedicated switch. I have a dedicated access point to be able to handle more devices, more throughput in my network. So keep that in mind for a network. When we talk about a network, way back here at the beginning, this definition, that's really what's going on. Think of all of those things we just mentioned. All right, in the next podcast, let me zip down here a little bit. Next podcast, we'll talk about our network models.